Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. In this video I'm gonna share with you my go-to chocolate cake recipe, and here's the list of ingredients. So I'm gonna start by just walking you through the steps for the cake and also some frosting in the end. So I'm starting off with the main thing, the chocolate. And to enhance the chocolate flavor, I'm using both dark chocolate and cocoa powder. And I'm gonna do a so-called blooming of the cocoa powder, and this is because I want that very intense chocolate flavor. I'm using Dutch process cocoa powder because I find that the color that your cake will have in the end is way more intense than with regular cocoa powder. So there's a little trick for you. And make sure you sift it because, as you can see, it tends to clump up. So once that is all sifted through, you are ready to take this and move it onto your stove, as we need to heat up all of the ingredients to activate the blooming process. And this will develop some very intense chocolatey notes. And we have the dark chocolate there because this is our indicator that the overall mixture is done. Once that chocolate melts, then you are good to go and you can just take this off the heat. Do not leave this alone. You want to stir this, otherwise you risk burning some bits and you don't want that flavor in your cake. I'm actually doing this on medium, but you can also do medium to low heat. And you can see that it's thickened up quite a bit and I see no chunks of chocolate. That means this is ready to be used. And before we get to that, I'm gonna just sift all my dry ingredients. And generally, even if I see a cake recipe that doesn't tell me to sift the dry ingredients, I always do because I ensure that I get a very nice crumb in the end. This is ready, and let's just prepare the liquids. So as you could see in the ingredients list, we still have to add some milk. So I'm just gonna dump that in this mixture and call all of this my liquid ingredients. And I just got this milk out of the fridge, and that means it's cold. And this is great because my mixture is rather hot at this point, and this will cool it down and be nicer by the time I have to use this and incorporate it to the cake mixture. So make sure to give it a good stir and just set aside while you cream your ingredients together. And I love this cake because it's so easy to just throw together. I only need a bowl and a spatula. I don't need to worry about a mixer and washing all of these dishes on top of everything else. So I love that. I do call it a creaming method cake because I do mix butter and sugar, but we don't have to make sure that it's super fluffy. We just want it to be sort of creamy. And when we're happy with that, we just add a little bit of vanilla. Again, it's always nice to add vanilla to cakes and baked goods because it enhances flavors, even though our main flavor here is the chocolate. I'm gonna use 1 egg. This is a small cake. It's a 6-inch round cake that I'm making today. So you could just double this and make it into a very tall 8-inch as well. So again, I'm just beating it in. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're not adding that much air. We're just trying to combine the ingredients effortlessly. And I'm gonna alternate between dry and wet ingredients, starting with dry and ending with dry. Just make sure that everything is incorporated before each addition. And since my chocolate mixture is quite runny, you do want to sort of fold this in and be very gentle when you incorporate it because you risk that you're just gonna spill it all over the place. I'm mixing very, very gently here. I'm in no rush. And you can already tell that even after the first addition, we already have this chocolate color in our batter. If you find that the batter is getting too thick, then just add a little bit of the liquid ingredients. The last bit of the dry ingredients, and let's mix this in carefully. And this is the lovely, luscious texture that we're after. It has a very deep, rich chocolate color. And before we get to the baking part, we need to prepare our pan. Now, I wanted to do something a bit special for this video. I wanted to show you how to prepare a baking pan so that your cake never, ever sticks. And the trick is to use parchment paper or baking paper. I start with a very thin layer of butter because that is the glue that's gonna hold the paper in place. And I line up the bottom with just a circle of parchment paper, and I line up also the sides. If you have some gaps like I do, just make sure you butter any part that needs to be in contact with the paper and you'll be fine. And that is it. We don't need to add flour to this. The butter and the paper will do the job. So now we're ready to just dump our batter slowly into the pan. Now this is going to give you 6 to 8 portions, and because I want to layer this cake, I decided to make it into a very tall one that I can slice into later on. Give it a tap to get rid of any air bubbles, and in it goes. This is a relatively low oven. This is a 160 Celsius, and it takes about 40 minutes because it's so tall. And while that cools, we can prepare our frosting. And in this case, I went for a very classic ganache. I'm gonna go for a 2-to-1 ganache. That means 2 parts chocolate, 1 part cream. So I have dark chocolate here, and I'm just adding my whipping cream. And again, because I want to keep this very easy, I'm just going to melt this in the microwave and let it do its thing. I stir very gently. I don't want to add any air at this point. And with ganache, you want to let the heat of the cream do the work. For this recipe, I'm going to use 2 batches of ganache, one for the filling and one for the frosting. Once your cake has cooled, you can unmold it, and I just take an offset spatula just to make sure that nothing is sticking. Just an insurance policy. And this is the big moment where we see the parchment lining in action. Look at that. It stayed in the mold. I only have this bit here that is barely touching the cake. Let me show you. It just comes right off without any effort. I'm going to flip this over by taking the rack, placing it at the bottom of the cake and letting that do the flipping. And there we have our cake without any chunks or any bits missing. It was a very clean way of getting it out of the pan. And it's also very nice and neat. It requires very little cleaning from your side, which I always love. Now, to build my layered cake, I need to figure out how many layers I want. In this case, I'm going to have 3 layers, which means I need to measure out exactly the height of my cake, divide that by 3, and that is the height of each layer. And if you are anything like me and can't cut even layers of cake, then I suggest you get yourself a cake leveler. This ensures that you have nice and even surfaces to work with. And another thing I should tell you is I don't like using syrups on my cakes. I think if you have a good recipe to work with, you don't need to add this water sugary thing on top of them. But now we have our 3 layers, we are ready to build our cake. And for that, I have a cool ganache that I'm just beating for about 2 to 3 minutes so that I build some air into it and it's more spreadable. And I'm also gonna add some salted caramel. There's a link in the description box, and also here hovering over the video, I have an amazing salted caramel recipe just waiting for you to make. And I would say that this is a rather optional component of the cake. I love salted caramel and I think it goes really well with the cake, but if you don't want to burden yourself with more elements, then you can just leave that out. So I'm gonna dump half of the filling and just take my time. I'm using a turntable to do this type of work because it really does all the work for you. You just need to keep your spatula level, keep it clean, and it will end up looking perfect. A drizzle, very generous drizzle of caramel. And we take another layer, put it in place, apply a little bit of pressure to make sure that it's set, and dump the other half of the frosting. Bit more caramel, and finishing with the layer. And this is the bottom layer because I want that very nice even top. Pressing it gently to make sure it's set, and this is ready to be frosted. Now I have another tip for you. You can refrigerate this before frosting, and I will tell you later on why you should do that. And this is my other ganache. This is my frosting ganache, which I haven't whipped, and it's at room temperature rather. And I'm gonna add most of it at the very top of the cake. I like to start frosting from the top down. Taking my spatula and slowly bringing it to the sides. And once you cover all of the top, you can just start removing bits and placing them on the side. You don't have to be very precise right now, you just want to get everything covered with it. And a good rule of thumb when you're icing a cake is that you should never let the spatula touch the cake, because then you will end up with crumbs. Once you've covered all your cake, then you can take a nice and flat spatula or a scraper and just go around. Now, this is why we want to refrigerate our cake. Because the ganache was at room temperature, if you have a cold cake, then it will start to set and it will be a bit easier to frost. Now, moving to the top part, you want to pull inwards any leftover frosting. And at this point, we've gotten rid of all the excess. You can detail this as much as you like. You could go over again with the cake scraper, but I'm quite happy with this look. The ganache will set very quickly, and if you cut into this cake straight away, you will have a very nice and firm frosting layer. So without further ado, I'm cutting into this cake now and showing you those beautiful layers. Now we're gonna gently pull our slice and look at that. We have 3 even cake layers, very defined ganache filling layers, and you can even see some bits of that caramel peeking through. You can see that the cake is super dark, rich in color, moist, and just delicious. I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel.